The projector blinked and the slide read in black block text, "If you are being observed, remain seated. Subject 37 stopped mid, reached for the exit and stared at the glowing screen. Suspicion tightened his chest. He pressed his fingertips into the badge at his throat to steady himself. Subject 37 had been led into the sealed training archive 5 hours earlier with a laminated redacted badge and a voucher that said Orientation Unit D. He walked in with his hands visible, palms flat against the chair arm. He kept rehearsing the compliance gestures the staff had demonstrated. Hands folded, eyes lowered, voice minimal. The first 3 instructions on the screen matched those gestures. The second sentence on the projector made everything a rule, not a suggestion. A measured voice filled the room from the projector's small speaker. Institutional presenter spoke with the steady cadence of corporate orientation and the exact pauses of a recorded directive. "This briefing is intended for individuals under active observation," the voice said. "Follow protocol. Deviation will be noted." The voice did not look toward the archive. It spoke from the projected slide. Subject 37's mouth went dry. He stood up slowly and tested the archive doors. The handle did not turn. He set his shoulder against it and felt the metal hold. The locked tone, a soft descending chime, started in the ceiling speakers. Monitoring operator appeared on the control monitors in the observation room as a gray silhouette behind glass. Subject 37 mouthed, "Who is there?" But the presenter slide continued without interruption. The slide switched to an image of a hand placed flat on a table and 3 numbered actions beneath it. The institutional presenter read them in a calm, even voice. "Place your hands flat. Do not point. Do not attempt to leave without authorization." Subject 37 copied the gesture with mechanical precision. His fingers trembled, but he did not move them. Suspicion evolved into an acting decision. Subject 37 did not trust the signage. He tested his phone. The signal read "no service." He tapped the laminated badge. The ID strip showed blacked-out text and a barcode with a redacted stamp. The room smelled of toner and stale coffee. The hum of ventilation vibrated at a pitch that made him focus on the concrete task of breathing slowly. A monitor in the corner switched to a close-up feed of Subject 37 from the ceiling camera. The image showed his hands, the badge, the abrasion on his left knuckle. Monitoring operator's face was visible in a secondary feed now, sharp cheekbones, a clipped ponytail, a lanyard like his own. The operator's fingers moved across a keyboard with quiet, practiced motions. Monitoring operator out loud into an internal channel, "We see him. He is following." The voice came muffled from the wall speaker, but still precise. Subject 37 heard his own name spoken by another human and felt a fresh flush of alarm. "Subject 37, the operator repeated, naming him for the system. The name had been a file tag until that moment. Hearing it anchored the observation. Institutional presenter continued the recording. "When you understand you are being observed, do not make direct eye contact with cameras. Look slightly below the lens. Keep breathing normal. Speak only when prompted." The slide showed a diagram of gaze lines and a redacted enforcement clause. Subject 37 angled his chin slightly downward, following the instruction. He glanced at the one-way mirror that faced the archive. Reflections from the projector made a thin strip of pale light across the glass. Subject 37 raised his hand slowly to touch the mirror. The reflection lagged by a single blink. His fingers moved. The image in the mirror hesitated and then copied the motion half a second later. His suspicion shifted to unease when the reflection failed to sync. He withdrew his hand and watched the glass. The presenter kept talking. "If an inconsistency appears between your movements and the reflection, maintain protocol. Do not gesture toward the mirror. Do not attempt to touch the glass." Subject 37 swallowed. He tested the instruction by tapping the glass with the pad of his finger. The reflection did not tap. Instead, a second hand appeared framed behind the glass at the same time. The recording said, "Observers may mimic or delay responses to assess escalation." A silhouette stepped into the observation room behind the glass. The monitoring operator's face tightened for the first time. "Security liaison online." A cropped text overlay announced on one monitor. The room's lights hummed as an auxiliary indicator lit a strip along the control bank. A small red LED flashed on a device labeled "Restrict." Subject 37's hands clenched under the table. He had not planned to try the door, but the knowledge that security liaison could intervene made his attempt more urgent. He rose and moved toward the exit anyway, voice cut off into a dry cough. "I'm leaving," he said to the empty room. The institutional presenter did not respond with words. Instead, the slide flipped to a redacted protocol, and the audio produced the low lockdown tone used in training simulations. The exit latch engaged with a soft mechanical clunk. Subject 37 went to the control bank to test the emergency release. He pressed a rectangular panel marked with a blurred seal. Nothing happened. The security camera above the exit swung, and a narrow infrared beam cut the floor in front of him, meeting his shoes. He stepped back. The monitoring operator's feed split to show a close-up of his face. "Do not attempt to force the door," the operator said into the intercom. "Stand down." The words were plain and final. His emotion moved from suspicion to panic, but he kept his voice steady enough to be measured. He put his palms back on his knees and breathed with slow, forced counts. He obeyed. He answered when the presenter prompted a single-word check in Subject 37, "State your status," the institutional presenter intoned. He replied with a hurried nod. "Subject 37, I am compliant," he said. "Acknowledged," the presenter answered. The voice kept its modulated calm. The presenter then shifted to a slide showing a heavily redacted clause. White bars hid most of the sentence. One visible phrase read, "Deviations will result in," and then a black bar. Monitoring operator's eyes flicked to a private panel. The feed in the observation room showed a line of technicians gathering behind the mirror. An archive technician appeared by name on a lower monitor. The on-screen tag read, "Archive Technician Rivera." Rivera's hands were visible as she pulled a tray of restraints from a cart. She spoke into a headset. "Control, we are holding standby." Await trigger. The operator's fingers hovered near a physical switch. Subject 37 felt the room narrow around him. He rubbed the abrasion on his left knuckle and remembered the morning he missed his train. The memory was a single crisp scene of a frayed ticket and a hurried apology to a commuter who had bumped him. The memory did not explain his current situation, but it kept his mind on discrete facts: the badge, the date on his voucher, the smell of toner. He used those facts to keep calm. The presenter continued with procedural language. "If you reach for the glass, enforcement will be enacted. If you attempt to sabotage a monitoring device, enforcement will be enacted. Enforcement may include chemical suppression and temporary sedation." Subject 37's breath shortened and then extended into a deliberate cadence. He did not reach for the glass again. An unexpected feed cut changed the rhythm of the room. One monitor that had been displaying a blank corridor flickered to life with footage from an auxiliary camera. The corridor was empty, and then a shadow passed across its length. The monitoring operator tapped the frame and zoomed. "Who is moving in the hallway?" "Rivera." Her voice was a quiet, clipped question. "Unknown." The operator replied. "No badge read. No transit on scheduled logs." He started a call with security liaison. The control bank displayed a caution. "Interference detected." Subject 37 had no context for that message beyond the fact that the archive was supposed to be sealed. The presenter paused mid-sentence on a slide that showed 2 columns. Expected behavior and observed anomalies. A small red channel appeared on the lower edge of the projector, showing an alternate camera angle, a close-up of Subject 37's eyes. The presenter adjusted. "Observers may intervene if you demonstrate uncontrolled behavior," the voice said. "Observe the following exception clause." Black redaction blocked the clause, but a faint word was visible. Response. Subject 37 tried to map the clauses onto his options. His options felt smaller by the second. He looked toward the mirror again. The reflection of the room had shifted. The projector light now threw a faded rectangle across an empty chair, and the silhouette behind the glass held still. He swallowed and heard his own throat tense. The monitoring operator spoke to someone off-channel. "They initiated an unplanned assessment," he said. "Security liaison, you want us to deploy restraint." There was a rapid exchange of names and commands across feeds. Security liaison's voice came crisp and colored by something like impatience. "Hold, observe." "Allow presenter to complete directive." The operator's fingers hovered over the restraint trigger and then withdrew. The technician Rivera lowered the tray a fraction and waited. Subject 37's emotion shifted again, from panic toward a brittle obedience. He performed every instructed micro-gesture with the meticulousness of someone rehearsing for survival. He clenched less. He kept his chin down. He answered the presenter's scripted prompts in short phrases. Subject 37, I am compliant, he repeated when asked. Subject 37, I understand observation. The recordings captured his voice in a flat tone. A new slide displayed a diagram of the one-way mirror with 3 possible mirror responses: synchronized, delayed, mimic. The presenter's voice explained each in plain sentences. If the mirror mimics, treat it as observer play. If the mirror delays, remain passive. If the mirror is unsynchronized, report via code phrase. A code phrase window flashed briefly and then redacted. Subject 37 tested the code phrase silently on his breath. He did not speak it. At the front bank, the presenter suddenly looked not above the camera, but slightly below it. The presenter's usual mannerism shifted by microdegrees. Subject 37 noticed the change like an insect perceiving a change in light. The presenter's mouth tightened. For the first time since the recording began, the voice sound included a tiny fluctuation, an old microphone squeal or the hint of a live operator stepping in. The observation room behind the glass stirred. A silhouette moved forward and then paused. The presenter's slide read a single, uncensored sentence long enough to be alarming. If you intentionally break protocol, observers will not only record the act, they will replicate it. The black bars around the sentence seemed to pulse as if under a scanner. Subject 37's hands went cold. He thought of leaving and of being seen trying to leave. He thought of Rivera and the operator who had the power to press a switch. He considered speaking to the mirror, to the people behind it. He did not do either. Then he did something the slides had not prepared him for. He stood up and walked deliberately to the projection console. He placed both palms on the metal edge and looked up, not at the lens but at the presenter on the screen. Stop the file. Stop observation. His voice was short and raw. There was a rapid exchange in the observation room audio, a burst of clipped commands. Rivera's name came over the line twice. The operator muttered, "Not authorized." Security license overlay flashed, "Engage." The presenter's recorded voice continued to read the clause without pause. A hidden relay clicked and the projection flickered. Lights in the archive brightened for the first time to reveal technicians assembling near the door. Technicians moved in layers behind the one-way glass and then, to Subject 37's shock, a pair of gloved hands placed a mask over his face. He felt a cool strap fasten under his chin and a chemical smell press at his nostrils. He struggled for a fraction, then his limbs trembled and slowed. Rivera's gloved voice said, "Sedation administered. Secure posture. Prepare file closure." The technician's hands were steady, efficient, and they lifted him gently to a reclining chair. Subject 37's resistance faded with the world as the sedative took hold. He felt fingers tighten on his wrist and then release. The camera angle moved close to his face. The presenter announced, "Record discontinued." The feed cropped to a grainy close, up of his eyes as they saw the technician pin a redacted seal across the console. When Subject 37 regained a sliver of awareness, he was strapped and breathing shallowly. Rivera wrote a time on a small slate and snapped a photograph of the sealed console. The monitoring operator exhaled into his headset. "File stamped," he said. "Archive access redacted for all parties." The presenter offered one final line through the projector. "Calm as ever, this file is discontinued." The projector light dimmed. The vault door sealed with a metallic slide and the control bank signed out of the system. The image that lingered longest before the recording cut was a small red LED, steady, unblinking, embedded in the console near the projector. When the feed terminated, the LED still glowed. Subject 37's last coherent thought before the sedation reclaimed him was a practical one. He had followed the protocol down to the motion of his chin and still been restrained. He held that fact against the fading edges of consciousness. The archive stamped the recording with a redacted access code. Rivera bagged the restraint tray and walked out of frame. The monitoring operator logged an incident and pushed the file into long-term storage, adding a terse note. "Subject non-compliant, attempted exit. Sedation applied. File discontinued." The presenter's voice did not change tone as it read the entry. In the control room, security liaison posted a short directive to the internal feed. "Maintain observation posture in future orientations. Update protocol." The operator typed a confirmation and then rested his fingers on the keyboard. He glanced once at the still, glowing LED and then at a printed sheet of paper, pinned with a thumbtack. The paper had a single line of visible text. "Do not speak of this file. The final frames of the recording held on the sealed console and the red LED. The light was small and persistent. The vault did not unlock. The observers left the control bank to other duties. Rivera pushed the cart down the corridor and closed the door behind her. The file closed with a stamped code and a quiet admonition. Outside the sealed archive, nothing happened. Inside, the blinking LED marked a continuing state. Recording, watching unresolved. The presenter had said discontinued, but the red light suggested a different verb. Subject 37 slept under sedation with his hands still folded in the taut position of compliance. Rivera locked the slate in a drawer and took one last photograph of the sealed console. The operator archived the footage under a redacted tag. The final image that would surface in the file copies was the small red LED, centered in a frame of industrial gray. The room that had witnessed the incident returned to its baseline hum. The archive stamped the recording with a redacted access code and filed it. The presence of observation did not end with the file. The LED continued to glow in the dark control room, an instruction and a reminder. The archival tag read, "File discontinued." Outside, a courier collected an unmarked envelope from a locked drop box. Inside was a printout with the same stamped code and a single typed line. For authorized review only, Rivera signed a digital receipt, and the courier left without asking questions. The chapter closed on the concrete event it had opened with. The projector, the red light, the sealed door. The last audible sound before the archive cut power was the faint analog hiss of the presenter, its final words reduced to static. The LED blinked once and then remained steady as if the recording had chosen to watch in silence. Subject 37 woke later in a medical bay with an IV line and a sore knuckle. The technicians kept their distance. Rivera's name was on the chart. The operator's confirmation code was stamped on the discharge form. He left the facility under a release that required compliance with future follow-up. He walked into a street that smelled of rain and bus exhaust, carrying only the memory of the badge and the red LED. He would not speak of the file. He kept that decision like a folded list in his pocket. Yet when he touched the abrasion on his left knuckle, he remembered the mirror that had not matched him. He remembered the presenter's voice lowering its gaze. He remembered Rivera's steady hands. The final line in the archived log was simple and specific. File discontinued. The red LED continued to glow in a sealed room behind a locked door. Subject 37 did not know whether the observers had gone. He did not know whether the red light meant or waiting. He did know one concrete thing. The recording had not finished watching him when the projector went dark. He carried that fact forward as he practiced small actions, keeping his chin lowered, palms flat when he sat, answering only when prompted. Each movement was a rehearsal against being noticed again. Each time his thumb brushed the folded note in his pocket, he felt the persistent sting of a hand that had never reached the glass. The file remained stamped as discontinued. The LED continued to blink in that locked room. Someone had written, "You do not speak of this file." The subject 37 kept a silence that tasted like metal. He learned to listen instead for the sound of a distant red light in a control room he might never see again. The chapter ends with a technician sliding the sealed ledger into a drawer and the console's red LED reflected once in the stainless steel edge of a cart. Rivera closed the drawer, turned the key, and left the archive. The glow of the LED remained as a single, concrete thing in the sealed vault. The door clicked shut and the small red recording LED above the observation glass flipped on. Suspicion tightened through subject 37 in a physical, immediate way. He pressed his fingertips to the laminated badge at his throat, feeling the ridged edge and the warmth of the lanyard, and he froze. The projector at the front of the room kept a single slide lit in stark black type. The last visible line read in capital letters, "If you are being observed, remain seated." He stopped mid-reach for the exit and his hand drifted back to his lap. He had followed the orientation path up to this moment. Sign the waiver, take the badge, sit in the projection room. That sequence meant something concrete. The badge had a redacted panel. The lanyard smelled of toner dust and stale coffee. Subject 37's baseline had been compliance, arrive on time, smile for her, remember where the restrooms were. Now the baseline shifted into suspicion and a quick series of motions. He checked the door handle with the pad of a finger, then ran both palms over his knees like someone testing his own balance. The institutional presenter filled the speakers with the same calm tone used in every archived briefing, low and steady, the voice slightly overmodulated with analog crackle. Remain seated while observation is active, the presenter. The sentence was practice. The delivery was instruction. Subject 37 let that policy line land against his sternum. He heard the ceiling conduit hum. He kept his chin tucked and his shoulders low. He tried to stand once more. The handle offered resistance, a click, and the glass showed him a reflection that did not line up with his own movement. For a beat he felt the shock of a mirror answering wrong. His hand jerked back. He touched his badge again and waited. He did not look directly into the camera above the screen. He angled his sight slightly downward, following the presenter's direction. An archive technician in the control room on the other side of the glass noticed the feed anomaly, Tech 1 to Supervisor. The projection feeds showing a latency spike on camera 4, the technician said. He spoke short sentences because the recording standards required crisp, transmittable dialogue latency or local interference. The observation supervisor replied. Their voices came faint through the speakers, layered under the presenter's track and the room tone, clipped and businesslike. Latency, the technician insisted. Subject 37 is attempting exit. Door cycles show closed but movement is registered at the sill. The supervisor answered with the kind of flat caution people used when a procedure might become a liability. Hold the feed unless there's a breach, the supervisor directed. We follow protocol, the technician typed. The keyboard sounded thin and urgent. Subject 37's hands began to fidget with the thin fabric wristband. His thumb found the abrasion on his left knuckle and rubbed it until skin warmed. He had been given a training badge earlier that morning, but nothing in onboarding said, "Do not test the glass." That instruction came in black block text earlier and in the presenter's cadence now. He could obey and remain physically safe, or he could move and risk setting an escalation into motion. The word escalation belonged to protocol checklists, not to people, but the room made the term real. The presenter resumed with a procedural clarity that made the room feel like a machine clinic. If observation is confirmed, avoid direct eye contact with observation personnel. Maintain a neutral posture, one hand in view, one hand resting on the lap. Do not address the mirror or glass directly, the voice did not ask. Subject 37 moved his right hand onto his knee and laid the left flat on the seat. His fingers spread to show openness. He inhaled to steady himself. Compliance felt like an installed instruction now. Across the glass, the archive technician tapped a finger on a monitor. Supervisor, look at slide 9, the technician said. Live overlay shows time-stamped entries for subject 37 in multiple locations. The supervisor leaned closer to the bank of monitors. Show me on screen. Redacted rows scrolled like a ledger. Date, location, subject 37, status, active. The technicians exchanged a clipped, wordless breath. Subject 37 watched the slide illuminate the front wall. A narrow, redacted bar had been drawn through several fields. He traced the bar with his eyes. The presenter kept reciting rules. The room smelled of toner and cheap disinfectant. The projector bulb left a faint sugar of dust motes in the air. He felt the transition from suspicion to a colder, quieter compliance. Moving only when permitted, hands visible, feet flat on the floor. He held himself strictly to the presenter's instructions to avoid setting any mechanism off. The observation supervisor and the archive technician argued in brisk exchanges that fit the institution's rhythm. Cut the feed, the technician demanded. We can end this before escalation. We do not cut unless there's an authorized breach, the supervisor replied. We follow chain of command. It's a live anomaly. The technician said protocol allows for intervention on anomalies. Supervisor authorized temporary override. Not yet. Not without confirmation. Monitor more feeds. That argument moved like clicks on relays. Each word a small lever that could flip the situation. Subject 37's breathing shortened. He tapped the badge twice, then swallowed. He tried to look at the observation glass without making it look intentional. When his reflection moved, the figure behind the glass did not precisely mirror him. The reflection's head dipped a fraction of a second late. He held his breath and tested a tiny nod. The glass figure nodded later. He felt the shift from compliance to a curious, probing panic. He wanted reason, confirmation, a physical explanation. He leaned forward once, the angle minimal. The presenter, do not focus on reflections, focus on posture cues for assisted response. That sentence tightened something in subject 37. He straightened and sat back, palms pressing down to ground himself. The technicians watched on monitors and debated camera feeds. The technician keyed in a request. Supervisor, camera 4's timecode is running behind master by 900 milliseconds. A delay is not interference. The supervisor countered. We cannot assume the visual mismatch is an anomaly without logs. Continue observation. The technician's fingers stilled on the keyboard. The projector advanced. The new slide was heavily redacted but visible enough to carry a new threat. A list of timestamps and locations with the heading, partially obscured notes. Repeat subject instances. The technician's faces tightened. This archive contains multiple recorded instances. The technician said it's not a single file. It's replicated entries. The supervisor read the lines and for the first time his voice lost the practiced flatness. Replicated how? He asked. Before the technician could finish, an unseen voice spoke from the ceiling speakers in a tone that was not the presenter's controlled calm. It's simply and without preamble. Do not attempt contact. The room's fluorescent tubes hummed louder. The word contact landed in subject 37's ribcage. The door lock engaged with a series of metal clicks, each click sounding measured and final. The glass frame warmed ever so slightly where it met the observation wall. The seam sealed with a thin mechanical whisper. For an instant everyone held their place. Subject 37 because the voice demanded it, the archive technician because his hands hovered over keys, the supervisor because authority now felt split between procedure and another force. The presenter resumed in its archival tone, but a new overlay appeared on the screen. Conditional escalation, active if rules breached. The presenter's words grew precise. If viewers attempt contact after observation is confirmed, automatic containment protocols will initiate. Follow containment instructions only when directed. The sentence functioned like a machine instruction. Subject 37's muscles slackened simultaneously with a sharp, immediate tension in his throat. Subject 37's mind raced through a narrow corridor of possible actions. He counted them in small motions so he would not lose track. 1. Remain. 2. Test the glass. 3. Attempt to leave. Each option carried a measurable cost. He tested the glass again and found it unyielding. The reflection's shoulders shifted a shade out of sync. He angled a hand toward the seam and felt the urge to touch the surface and see if the outside kept time with the inside. He stopped. The presenter's voice had said only to avoid eye contact. It had not specified hand movement toward the glass. The archive technician's protest sharpened. Supervisor, we should cut live. There are multiple entries for subject 37 across the archive. This is not a containment exercise. This is observation of repeat events. Keep the feed. Document everything. The supervisor insisted. We need traceable evidence. We follow protocol. The technician lashed a hand across the console. Protocol didn't account for replication. Protocol didn't code for copies. Supervisor, this is a governance failure. We escalate through chain. The supervisor answered. Subject 37 could hear their voices like objects behind the glass. He could also hear his own breath, the small hitching cough he had when he imagined making a mistake during training. He moved his fingers, consciously keeping them flat and visible. The presenter's next slide added a new instruction. List all presence indicators. Do not speak directly to observers. The sentence acted as a tether. He felt the emotion shift again from curious panic toward a brittle focus. He would obey precisely so he might buy information. Then the redacted slide changed the stakes. A line of text, originally blacked out, flickered and revealed a single word between bars. Copies. The technicians whistled through the teeth of their breath. Copies. The technician repeated. Subject 37 is listed across 3 separate events localized at differing coordinates. Who authored these files? The supervisor demanded. Archive logged them under internal compliance. No author tag. The technician's fingers moved faster now, retrieving auxiliary feeds. Subject 37 felt the shape of the room change. What had been an individual test now looked like a sample in a study. The realization pushed him back toward the presenter's rules. He wanted to stand, to ask, to say his name and demand someone answer. Instead, he let the rules govern his behavior. He kept his hands in view and breathed slowly enough to keep the monitors from registering it as agitation. That controlled breathing masked a tremor under his ribs. A soft, metallic whine rose from the control room speakers and then cut. On the projection screen, an additional overlay read archival interaction. Supervised. The presenter's voice, which had always been steady, gave a sentence that was new. If the subject initiates prohibited contact, automated observer address will engage. Do not respond except as directed by overlay. Subject 37 felt the sentence like an instruction taped to his sternum. Behind the glass, a technician whispered to the supervisor, "We didn't expect the archive to trigger a direct address." The supervisor responded with 3 short lines. Document contain. Report. Subject 37's fingers tightened on his badge. The fabric of the lanyard rubbed his knuckle raw. He glanced again at the mirrored glass. The reflection's head turned a fraction before his did. The mismatch widened to a quantifiable delay. He swallowed. He bent his shoulder forward and reached out 1 slow inch toward the glass. The motion was small, deliberate, and against the presenter's most recent instruction. He moved because he needed to confirm whether the glass was a simple mirror or a portal to another observation. At that moment, the automated locks engaged more firmly. He felt the seat anchor under him. The observation speakers filled with a voice that was not the presenter and not the recorded calm. It spoke his badge number, the redacted digits that matched his tag. Subject 37, the voice said, "Do not attempt physical contact. You are being monitored." The voice was not cold. It was matter of fact and had the same measured cadence as administrative announcements. Subject 37's mouth went dry. The glass reflected his hand hovering against it, and, in the reflection, the hand behind the glass stopped an eighth of a second later. The archive technician and the supervisor exchanged a rapid-fire sequence of commands and rebuttals. "Cut feed now," the technician urged. "We can't verify chain." "We cannot cut feed without executive authorization," the supervisor insisted. "Do you authorize a manual feed term?" "I do not have clearance for that action," the technician snapped. "Then request clearance and continue monitoring," the supervisor. The technician punched the request into a terminal. His voice dropped. "Request placed." He said, "Pending." There was a thin pause. An audible intake from the tech supervisor. "There's a live overlay change. Archival status moving to discretionary containment. A directive is queued. Acknowledge," the supervisor answered. Subject 37 imagined the overlay issuing a directive like a physical command. He let his hands rest visibly and forced his jaw to unclench. The emotion inside him had shifted again. Curiosity had become compliance, which then curdled into a contained terror that focused on physical, measurable actions like pressure and pulse. He moved his thumb along the edge of the badge and found a tiny nick in the plastic. The nick grounded him. He breathed with a counted rhythm. Technicians on the other side watched the monitors as a cluster of archived windows populated with other Subject 37 instances. In one window, a man in a different shirt sat in the same seat, made the same small movements, reached for the glass, and triggered the same automated address. In another window, a woman with shorter hair held perfectly still and did not reach. The tech muttered, "They're repatterning." "This isn't random," the supervisor. "Document the patterns and tag all entries," the technician typed. Tagged, replicated instances. The room tension rose and dropped like measured pneumatic pressure. The presenter's voice resumed the training cadence, but now its sentences read like a contingency manual with active threats. "If containment activates, follow the displayed instructions. Remain seated, keep hands visible. Await technician guidance." Subject 37 watched the slide change to a schematic of the room with an animated red arc closing on the door frame. The animation was simple and clinical. The consequences were concrete. His knee bounced once. He stopped it. He felt his pulse at his temples. Without warning, the speaker system leaned in with one final unfamiliar line. Subject 37, "Do not attempt to identify observers. Identification constitutes interference." Then the archive feed glitched, and the presenter's voice deteriorated into thin static. The projector flickered, the red LED stuttered twice, and a new overlay stamped the slide. "File discontinued, archival hold." The technical noise filled the room. The technicians exhaled audio, less curses. Subject 37 remained seated, hands visible, eyes downcast, and the weight of compliance pressed into his shoulders like a held posture. In the control room, the technician snapped, "Supervisor." The archive issued a discontinuation. "We should have cut the feed when I asked." The supervisor closed his eyes, then opened them. "We documented everything." That is the policy. The technician hit the console with a palm and then tapped the keyboard to capture logs. We need a report. We need to catalog every instance, do it, the supervisor curtly, and log the procedural variants. Their argument ended in recorded motions and the clack of keys. Subject 37 felt the room recalibrate. The projector's light warmed and steadied. The stamped overlay sat like a paper label on the screen. The presenter's final audible line before the static said, "File discontinued. Monitor for residual indicators. Maintain posture until cleared." That instruction functioned as closure and a command. Subject 37 kept the same fixed hands, shoulders released in a way that suggested exhaustion, not relief. He touched the abrasion on his knuckle, then smoothed the lanyard back into place. He had acted. He had failed to escape. He had triggered a conditional escalation and been directly addressed by an unseen authority. The technicians on the other side began triage procedures as dictated by the supervisor. Their voices were short and precise. Capture frames, run redundancy checks, prepare incident report. Subject 37 listened to the clack of keys and the low, breathy hum of the ventilation. He realized the room would now be logged in ways he could not access. The presenter's calm remained recorded on the file, but the discontinuation stamp made the session into an artifact rather than an ongoing event. The final moment of the chapter closed on an exact physical detail. The projector bulb popped once with a sharp, confined sound. The light dropped to a thin circle before the projector's cooling fan wound down. The red recording lead above the observation glass dimmed not off, but down to a faint pulse. The last image on the screen was the archival stamp that read file discontinued, archival hold. And subject 37 kept his hands visible until a technician's voice through the glass gave one short instruction. Remain seated. Do not speak, he obeyed. Outside, the control room's monitors re-synced to log the discontinuation. Concrete events had changed the shape of his immediate reality. The door had sealed, the reflection had misaligned, the archive had revealed replicated entries, and an unknown authority had addressed him by badge number. The chapter ended not with revelation but with a precise action. Subject 30 pressed his fingertips into his badge and waited for the next physical instruction to arrive. A dark palm struck the observation glass. Subject 37 grabbed the cold surface with both hands and felt fingernails scrape the interior plexiglass where the mirror met the frame. Suspicion narrowed his breathing. Suspicion had been a low, steady ache since the first slide told him to remain seated. The sound of the palm, sharp wet, cut through the projector hum and made Subject 37 lurch toward the glass. He pressed his forehead against the cool barrier and saw a silhouette outline hold perfectly still on the other side, the knuckles leaving a smear of condensation. Subject 37 did not wait to think. He kept his shoulders hunched, fingers splayed over his badge, and watched the silhouette. The room smelled of toner, old coffee, and rubbing alcohol. He could hear the projector fan, slower now, a distant vent exhaling on a regular pull. The red lanyard at his throat rubbed against his palm. He tracked the ridged edge of his laminated head as if the texture itself could steady him. The recorded voice of the institutional presenter came back on through the speaker with the same even cadence as before. The voice did not hurry. The voice did not flinch. Subject 37, the presenter, and the voice used his designation with the same clipped formality that had labeled him hours before. Remain seated and follow protocol. The line landed like instruction, not comfort. Subject 37 pressed his fingertips into the badge and let his breathing slow on purpose. He had learned in the last briefing what the word protocol could mean when observers were not passive. He had watched the slide that said, in block text, that if you were being observed, you should remain seated. He had seen the small red recording lead flip on above the glass earlier. Those images sat in his head like instructions that might save him or mark him. The silhouette on the far side of the glass thumped its palm again, this time lower near the seam. A tiny crack of static jumped down the interior glass and ran along the frame. Subject 37 flinched back when the sound drew up the hairs at his wrist. He did not shout. He did not move toward the door. He kept both hands visible and folded his fingers over the badge until the plastic bowed against his skin. The presenter restarted the briefing on the projector with a clean fade. The slide changed to a numbered list. 1. Do not confront the observation window. 2. Keep hands visible. 3. Do not attract attention. The presenter read each rule plainly. Institutional presenter. The voice announced without warmth, if you notice any contact, remain compliant. Do not attempt to touch or retaliate. Compliance reduces escalation. The words had the weight of a manual, but Subject 37 felt them like a rope tightened around his ribs. He understood the purpose of the rules. He also understood that the rules were meant for someone being watched, not taught. He had followed them earlier. He would follow them now. Something moved behind the observation corridor. Light flashed on a bank of monitors, and a figure, observation technician Ruiz, reached for a control console. Ruiz's hands trembled slightly when he toggled the feed. The image on one monitor cut from the empty corridor to a live camera 3 rooms away. The live feed showed another trainee sitting in a blue chair, hands on knees, performing the exact compliance motion Subject 37 had been instructed to learn. 2 palms flat, head bowed, eyes lowered. The feed did not show the trainee standing again. It showed the chair empty 30 seconds later and a pair of shoes being carried out of frame. Ruiz's mouth opened and closed. Subject 37's neck tightened. He understood in a concrete, rational way what the presenter had not said aloud. Failure on the protocol checklist resulted in removal. Ruiz hit the console again and a different camera cut in. The new monitor displayed a small conference room where a trainee had laughed at a joke and then been escorted out moments later while their face stayed visible for 3 more seconds on a peripheral feed. Eyes still on the projector as the door closed behind them. The live footage was not edited. It showed sequence and consequence. Non-compliance intervention, disappearance from frame. Ruiz said a dry voice behind the glass. Hold feed 2. Bring room C to angle 3. The voice belonged to security observer Hale. He had the slow, exact speech of someone who reported facts as weapons. Institutional presenter. Continue script. Institutional presenter. The voice replied on the projector. Section 4. If prompted by contact, present palms, keep head low, recite identification when instructed. The presenter read the line and the words landed like a litany. Subject 37 mouthed the syllables silently and then rehearsed the motion. He pulled his chin toward his chest, flattened his hands on his thighs as if practicing a mundane office habit. The motion felt ridiculous and precise. It also felt like survival. Hale's silhouette appeared on one monitor, framed by the corridor between observation bays. He did not come into the room. He stayed on the monitor and watched. Ruiz leaned into the console and tapped the screen again, an attempt at human contact through cables and pixels. His voice, filtered through the small speaker near the controls, was too quiet for the room. Hale, the feed from room D just froze 2 minutes ago. Ruiz. His words were short. He Subject 37's designation more like a question than a fact. Subject 12. He stopped. Hold it, Hale. We proceed as written. Presenter will advise. Ruiz's hand knocked a stack of clipboards. The sound flitted across the otherwise steady hum. He looked at Subject 37 through the glass and then away. The tension rose in the room like a pressure change. It pulled at Subject 37's tongue. He had to act. He had to show he understood the rules, because the monitors had shown the cost for ignoring them. A technician's feed flipped to black and then to a still of a redacted document. Hale tapped twice on his console, and a printed directive appeared on the monitor bank. A stamped line marked in red, the contents blacked out in rectangular blocks. The redaction was precise and official. Subject 37 watched the black boxes as if they might shift and reveal something vital. The presenter continued speaking, but now the recorded voice paused just long enough between phrases that the pauses felt like places someone off. Camera could wedge instructions. Institutional presenter. Hale to the speaker, his tone sharper. Clarify subsection 9. Removal criteria. There was a delay. The presenter always delayed when redaction appeared. It sounded like a human being thinking around a restricted phrase. If the subject fails to follow a direct command, removal will be initiated. The presenter at last. Removal is immediate and non-negotiable. Explain your designation when prompted. The voice did not soften the clause. Subject 37 had seen the delayed feeds, and he had no illusions about what removal meant. An alarm thrummed in a low register somewhere in the observation bay. It was not loud, but it shook the metal of Ruiz's clipboard. The silhouette on the other side of the glass pressed both palms flat and then splayed all 5 fingers, one after another, in a tight, controlled motion that mirrored the compliance routine from the slide. The silhouette's shoulders shook in a way no human would admit to in public. Subject 37 noticed the small scab at the base of the silhouette's thumb where the skin had been scored. The detail lodged in him more effectively than any generalized horror. The mirrored glass warped for a breath. Subject 37 saw his reflection, his haircut, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the abrasion on his left knuckle. Then the reflection did not mimic the precise blink he made. A second face moved independently, a millimeter ahead, drawing a slow exhale that fogged the inside of the glass. The independent movement was small and precise. The mouth pulled into a half smile that did not match any expression Subject 37 had made. Subject 37 reached up with both hands and touched the area of the glass where the fog had formed. The reflection did not touch back. It kept its palms pressed flat, and then lowered them to lean its forehead to the glass, resulting in a smear on the inside where its breathing had condensed. The presenter continued, voice level and steady. If the subject observes non-mimetic behavior, perform step 4 of the compliance routine. Do not attempt to reciprocate contact. The sentence felt like a test. The reflection took a deliberate breath, and then it stepped backward, away from the interior side. It rotated its head, not to mirror Subject 37 but to survey the observation bay. It checked the monitors with a slow, human motion as if scanning for approval. Subject 37 realized then that the watchers watched not only through cameras but through reflections, through stage gestures performed at the glass as if they were rehearsing a protocol of provocation and response. Ruse's hand found a telephone and he tapped the receiver, then set it down. He kept looking at Subject 37 and then at Hale on the monitor. Hale, we have a non-mimetic at Bay 3. Ruiz, do we maintain removal posture? Hale's face did not change on the monitor. Maintain protocol. If it becomes invasive, escalate to containment. Containment overrides standard removal. Understood. Understood, Ruiz answered. He swallowed audibly. Subject 37 felt the sound like a stone in the air. The presenter on the projector spoke again. Subject 37, compliance will be tested now. Repeat identification when prompted and present both palms. Failure will result in immediate removal. Begin. The voice paused and then read a short list of scripted lines, one after another, with the calm of someone reading safety instructions in a hazardous lab. Subject 37 saw his options narrow to movements and words. He performed the routine. He set his hands flat on his thighs, he bowed his head, and he said his designation out loud. Subject 37. His voice came out narrow and thin. The presenter for birth month, and he gave it. The presenter requested a serial code. He recited the string of letters printed on his badge. Each answer was checked on the monitors. Each checked response made a notch in some invisible ledger. Halfway through the scripted prompts, a monitor in the control alcove jumped to a new feed. It showed a small conference room with a cracked laminate floor and overturned chair. In that feed, a trainee who had complied perfectly was later shown being escorted by 2 people wearing plain gloves. The trainee's mouth worked around a word. The feed cut when the trainee tried to speak. Subject 37 watched the sequence now with a new measurement. Compliance did not guarantee safety, but disobedience guaranteed removal. The reflection at the glass moved again. It no longer tried to match Subject 370's gestures. It drew a finger across the outer surface and then tapped twice at the seam where the observation glass met the frame. There was a tiny mechanical chime, like a soft bell, and the lights in the hallway dimmed for an instant. Subject 37 felt the chime in his teeth, the hollow vibration. The presenter continued to narrate the steps of the routine, but the recorded voice softened in the cadence of the final lines. A prescribed sequence that read like a checklist of humiliation and compliance. When the reflection pressed its face to the interior glass, its breath left a crescent of fog around its mouth. Subject 37 recoiled. He felt the urge to retaliate, to knock on the glass from his side, to make noise. He checked himself and remembered the chairs and the monitors and Ruse's hands shaking near the console. He executed the humiliation with deliberate slowness. Palms flat, head bowed, fingers threaded together. He allowed the observation technician and Hale to watch him perform every motion. Hale, Ruiz voice rawer, we were seeing non-mimetic contact escalate. Are you initiating containment? Not yet, Hale replied. Containment only when contact is invasive. We have a test parameter at present. He tapped the console and the directional cameras adjusted. He spoke into the mic with the clipped authority of a man reporting weather. Institutional presenter, proceed to Section 9B, activation of mirror entity protocol. The presenter obeyed. The voice read a passage that did not exist in any onboarding manual Subject 37 had ever seen. It was a sequence of behaviors: compliance, recitation, physical folding. The presenter read it with the same even cadence. But the content was shifted toward training a subject to be small and visible in exactly the positions that did not upset the watchers. Subject 37 felt an alien shame at the specificity. The words catalogued his body as evidence. Then the mirror betrayed him completely. The reflected face stepped away from the glass and did not return to being a reflection. It moved its hand to a small opening in the frame and, with a practiced motion, slid a thin metallic object into a concealed slot. The slot clicked. A faint lock mechanism sounded within the observation wall. The presenter did not mention the click. Ruiz heard it and cursed under his breath. Subject 37 lifted his head. The mirrored figure had turned to face the corridor and then, without hesitation, had wheeled around and walked away into the observation bay on the other side of the glass. It moved with the gait of a person released from rehearsal. It did not look back. The control bank lit up with new readouts. A logged message scrolled across a monitor. File 37 protocol complete. Subject 37's name flashed in a header line and then a procedural note registered. Escort initiated. The presenter finished the last scripted line and then added a final clause in the same calm tone. Escort personnel will retrieve you now. Keep hands visible. Comply without resistance. Subject 37 stood because the motion of standing seemed less risky than any other choice. He walked to the center of the conference room, hands visible at his sides, and waited. The doors to the corridor released with a hydraulic sigh. Two gloved hands reached around the threshold and gripped his upper arms with a practiced firmness. The grip was not rough, it was functional. He let himself be turned and led toward the corridor. He felt the touch of latex and the mild pressure at his triceps. Someone, unseen hands, lifted his badge and scanned it with a light. The scanner beeped and the sound felt like a verdict. As they moved him down the corridor, Subject 37 heard Ruse call out once more, louder this time, "Hale, who authorized escort." Ruse's voice cut to the back of him like a finger. Hale's reply came through the monitor in a single steady phrase: protocol. Authorized by archival directive. File sealed on completion. The sentence carried no hint of regret. End of line. A door hissed closed behind them. The room slipped away and the projector cut to a blank white slide. Only the small red recording LED continued to glow above the observation glass, a persistent point of color in an otherwise sterile strip of light. Subject 37 let his hands fall to his sides. The gloves left faint prints on his forearms. He smelled latex and the iron tang of the hallway's cleaning agents. They guided him into a narrow anteroom where a clipboard waited on a metal tray. A gloved hand flipped the top card over, read the printed checkboxes, and then checked 3 boxes with a blunt, clinical pen. Subject 37's name appeared in typed letters at the top. He reached for the pen as if to protest removal, and the gloved hand tightened on his wrist, a precise pressure that moved but did not bruise. Subject 37, said a voice near his ear, quiet, close, human, and not the projector's recorded calm. You complied. That is noted. It was Ruiz. He had followed them to the anteroom. You did what they required. Ruiz. Subject 37 said. The word came out ragged. He used the name to hold his center. What happens now? Ruiz avoided eye contact. He tapped the clipboard and then pointed at the printed directive where a line had been stamped in red ink and then blacked out with thick bars. We file the report. He said, we record compliance. We seal the file. He stopped, he swallowed and then exhaled. Sometimes they escort you out. Sometimes they don't. Subject 37 tried to read the expression on Ruse's face but could not make sense of it behind the surgical mask and the thin plastic shield. Ruse's eyes, however, held a particular tilt, an attempt at apology that never followed through. He had been part of the monitors, the feeds, the toggles. He had been the hands that switched cameras away from failures and toward rehearsed compliance. His presence now meant he felt complicit. They led Subject 37 to a final door. The record panel beeped and a green light flashed. The gloves released him and the pressure in his shoulders eased by a degree. He took a step forward into fluorescent light that smelled of sanitizer and machine heat. Someone clicked the handle and a human hand, bare, slid a small square across the reader. It was not gloved. The bare hand moved without ceremony, placed the card and withdrew. Subject 37, said the bare hand's owner in a tone that was neither the presenter nor Ruiz nor Hale. Walk out the corridor. Turn left at the second junction. Do not stop. Do not speak to staff. Report to intake on level 2. He walked because resistance had been scheduled out of his options. He moved down the corridor where fluorescent fixtures hummed above and the walls bore faint tape marks from where posters had been stripped. The red lead on the observation glass still shone at the far end like an afterimage. He counted his steps to keep from thinking. He documented each movement in the way the presenter had taught him. Heel strike, 2 roll, steady breath. He repeated the serial code under his breath until the words became mechanical. At the intake desk on level 2, a woman in plain clothes checked his badge, scanned his palm, and slid a thin envelope across the counter. Inside was a single printed form with bold, stamped headings and a line for signature. He signed. He had been through signature lines before, waivers, acknowledgements, a stack of papers that had begun when he entered for orientation. Now the forms were the last touch of officialness. They closed the loop. When he straightened, he saw Ruiz watching him from the intake doorway, hands folded as if against a chill. Ruiz looked smaller now that the monitors were out of frame. He lifted a hand and gave the briefest nod. Subject 37 nodded back. There were no words to exchange. The envelope felt thin in his pocket. It had the stamped header of the archive and a single line of redacted text. He leaned his fingers into the fabric and made sure the plastic edges of his id stayed where they had been. The hallway smelled of paper and cleaning solvent. The repetition of small, precise things, the clasp of a door, the click of a scanner, kept the panic out of his throat. As he moved away from the intake desk and toward the transit concourse, the reality of what had happened compiled in parcel shapes inside his head. A slide with an instruction, a red LED that turned on, a monitored compliance routine, a reflection that moved independently, a logged file marked complete. Each fact sat like a recorded timestamp. He did not know if he counted as returned to ordinary life, or if he had been passed into a different register where other hands catalogued him. He looked over his shoulder one last time at the intake bay. The glass there reflected his face back at him, but this time the reflection matched his movement. He tapped the pocket where the envelope lay, and his fingers closed around the corner of paper stamped with black bars. The recorded voice from the projector had ended in the room he left. Its cadence remained an echo in his head, like a rehearsal he could not unlearn. A door sealed somewhere behind him. It did not bang, it did not scream. It made the clinical click of a successful lock. The red LED continued to glow in the sealed archive far behind a wall and a series of cameras. Subject 37 stepped into the transit corridor with his badge flat against his chest. A small motion sensor above the intake desk blinked once and then went dark. He did not know if the watchers were still watching. He did not know whether compliance would mean safety beyond that corridor. He only knew what had been done and what he had done in response. He had performed the required motions, recited the lines, and allowed himself to be moved. Ruiz's eyes followed him for a moment at the threshold, and then Ruiz turned back to the console. The monitors filled with new feeds. Empty chairs, blank slides, a redacted schedule aligned in neat columns. Subject 37 tucked the envelope deeper and kept walking. The archive file labeled with his designation had closed. The red LED above the glass pulsed once, a tiny, steady heartbeat of light, and then remained lit. Outside in the fluorescent, lit corridor, he breathed and counted steps until the memory of the glass, the smudge of breath, the metallic click, the gloved hands, held its place as an item he could retrieve and show to others. He had not been permitted to keep the projector slides or the video feed. He had his memory and the envelope in his pocket. He walked past a maintenance door and, as he reached for the handle, he felt someone brush the back of his collar with a fingertip. He turned. Ruiz's face was in the doorway, human in a way the recorded voice never could be. Ruiz, quietly, save the envelope. Share it with someone who records these things. Not everyone here will tell the truth, but some of us will keep the record. He stepped back into the archive and closed the door. Subject 37 held the envelope until the plastic warmed against his palm. He did not open it then. He kept walking. Behind him, the archive auto sealed and the corridor's sound changed to a lower register, like the settling of a building after a load has been moved. The red lead still shone in his mind, an unblinking dot at the center of an image he could not unsee. He had complied, and compliance had bought him movement. The file had been sealed, and that seal alone would not tell what had happened to those who failed. He stepped into the fluorescent light of the concourse, and with deliberate motions, he recited the serial code once, twice, 3 times until it felt less like a script and more like a key. He held the envelope, the badge, and the memory of the glass as the only 3 proofs he could offer the world. The corridor led to a stairwell. He took one last look back at the intake bay and then descended. The final click of the archive door fell behind him like the last line of a recorded protocol. The red lead kept its glow. The chapter closed with the sound of the stairwell door sealing and one small object left visible. The laminated edge of Subject 37Z, sliding free of its lanyard as a gloved hand withdrew it for scanning, then returned. The red lead above the observation glass remained steady when the lights went out.